I want to talk about something somewhat controversial, and I'm going to do my best not to offend anybody because that is truly not my intention. I want to talk about the highly perpetuated myth that having children is the only path to purpose and fulfillment. So, I came across a video the other day, and it was from a woman talking about how her and her husband have chosen not to have children. And one of the comments on the video basically said that she was going to one day come to regret this decision, and that you can only ever know this depth of joy and love by having children. And this is a very common comment. You've probably seen comments just like it. In fact, this comment appears on pretty much every single piece of content from women discussing why they don't want to have children, or even content of women just simply existing without children. And I want to unpack that a little bit and talk about why that is. So, first, I want to talk about what it means to have children from an unconscious place. So, this channel is called the Conscious Partnership Project. And the reason why I called this channel that is because my entire philosophy, my entire way of looking at the world is really centered around awakening consciousness, bringing awareness to the way that we live our life and the choices that we make. And in the same way that I believe in conscious partnership, I believe in conscious parenthood. I believe in doing your own work to know yourself first before you make a decision as monumental as choosing to have a child. Because what happens much like when we enter into partnership unconsciously, which I do have lots of videos, which I can link, like, for example, a video on karmic connections in relationships, but we can have karmic connections between parent and child, right? So if a child is born to unconscious parents, so parents who have not done the work to heal from their own traumas, they have not done the work to recognize their own dysfunctional patterns. When a child is born into a situation like that, the burden then falls on the child to decide whether they are going to be the cycle breaker or not, right? And so, we all come from long lineages of ancestors that have passed down these cycles, these beliefs, these ways of existing. And every generation is kind of presented with the opportunity to decide whether or not they are going to bring consciousness to their choices and make different choices than those who came before them. And so, when children, and we know children are often born into unconscious situations, like it's very idealistic to believe that all children are born to white picket fence, happy nuclear families, right? Like that's just absolutely not the truth. And so when we look at, the burden that falls on the child to then decide whether they are going to be the one to do the work. And you probably know, because you're here watching this video, you know what it means to be the cycle breaker in the family. You know the work that goes into being the one who chooses differently, right? And so and I also, I just did a video about why you should stop helping people and why you should stop, self-abandoning yourself in relationships to try to rescue or save another person, or why you should self-abandon when it comes to finding purpose and the dangers in doing that and how it often leads to resentment. I think the same thing goes when it comes to having children. If you place your entire purpose and fulfillment for life onto your child, that often tends to lead to resentment in both directions between both the parent and the child. And it also ultimately you can only escape yourself for so long, right? So if your child is your entire reason for living, eventually that child is going to go on and they're going to live their own life, and you're still going to have to face yourself someday. So while it may provide a distraction momentarily, it's not that distraction's not going to last forever, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the patriarchy here. And when I talk about the patriarchy, what I'm talking about is systems of power that exist around the framework of man as God, right? So if we look at like Abrahamic religions and we look at, even just familial structures within like Christian society, everything is pointed towards the man as the head of the household, the man as God. And for the majority of human history, that was actually not the case. It was often that viewed as, woman as God, because woman was the vessel through which life was birthed, right? And so societies formed themselves around protection of the mother, because mother was the giver of life, right? And so mother and child, the vessel that creates life and the future of life on the earth, were protected, right? And that was the way that society established itself. And so that's kind of the difference between matriarchal and patriarchal. And so these patriarchal structures that we live within now currently, they're kind of grasping a little bit for air, right? Because we're going through this massive collective consciousness awakening, and we're going through this great remembrance of the divine feminine. The divine feminine is waking up. She's coming back into her power. And these structures that have benefited from suppressing the feminine for a long time, they are really kind of grasping for their control, right? They're like on their last legs and they're grasping for control. And this is why we see movements like the Red Pill movement and things like that. So patriarchy has made motherhood a liability to women, when motherhood is supposed to be the most sacred journey, the most sacred path. But in, the way that we currently have set up society, motherhood is a massive liability to women. It's a massive risk. It's a risk to the body. It's a risk to, your physical and mental well-being. And a lot of it depends on who you choose to have a child with, right? Because you are relying on that person for support. You are relying on that person for protection. And, you can see what happens when that choice is not made consciously, right? And so there's another creator who is a friend of mine. Her name's Danielle Wilk, and she has a channel called Harmonious Hearts. And she talks about, ancient societies like Atlantis and Lemuria, and how women were enslaved in these societies so that they could, harness the life force energy of fertility, and they could, study the life force energy of fertility. And like, there was a lot. So there's kind of, and she talks about how there's like this remembrance of these ancient experiences that a lot of us who are cycle breakers, a lot of us who are light workers, whatever name you resonate with, we carry that remembrance of the enslavement. And I think that the way that, the pressure that is put on women to fulfill certain roles and to act in certain ways can sometimes bring up that remembrance of what it means to be enslaved for your vessel, your life force energy, your ability to create. And so when women choose to live outside of these societal expectations, so when a woman chooses to exist without children, this is really triggering to these systems of power, right? And it's also triggering to individuals that feel as though maybe their choice was taken from them in some way, right? So maybe they, on some unconscious level, they feel like they have found themselves in a certain circumstance because they were told they had to be there, right? Like they followed the path they were told to take. And it's funny because you never see the inverse of these comments anywhere. Like you would never see a child-free person commenting on like a parenting video and being like, you're gonna really regret this someday. Like you just don't see that, right? Like you don't see the inverse of it. And that's because child-free people are not threatened or bothered by people with children. But for whatever reason, well, we know the reason. The reason is because when we're expressing judgment outwardly of another person, that's always coming from a shame that we're carrying within ourselves, right? And so the fact that these comments are so prevalent, and the fact that movements like the red pill are so prevalent, and like this, there's like this massive pushback of trying to like shame people and convince people that there's like only one path to purpose and one path to fulfillment, and that is, you know, nuclear family and parenthood, right? And it's like this, I think that people who have kind of fallen for that belief want to make sure that they, you know, bring everyone else kind of down with them in a way. And this is not, I'm not knocking parenthood at all by any means, but I'm just talking specifically to the people who leave these types of comments and who are like very emboldened to convince the world that like you have no purpose if you don't have a child. And I kind of want to talk about how, let's unpack how silly that belief is in and of itself. Like, let's talk about purpose over the concept of biology, right? Like, creation can exist in so many forms. And who's to say that the creation of a child is more valuable than the creation of art, the creation of community, the creation of healing, the creation of business, beauty, freedom, simply just existing in your own oneness, your own self, like just experiencing life to its fullest. Like, who is to say, you know, who is to place a value on one thing over the other? And I think that, you know, I always kind of like to look at things in terms of like the micro versus the macro. But if we, you know, were to look at an organism, let's say that an organism, you know, in terms of people that are, you know, super pro-natalist and talking about, you know, pushing, you know, that there's like a depopulation agenda, and that like we need to like repopulate the world and whatever, all these beliefs that you see people talking about, like pro-natalism and stuff. And it's like, okay, think of an organism and think of a mass of cells. If they were like, if their entire purpose was to procreate, that would be a bad thing, right? For the organism. Like that would lead to, in a lot of cases, the destruction of the organism. So if we look at this in the macro sense, like the earth as the organism, imagine if every single person on the earth had that belief that like our only purpose was to multiply. That's the only thing that matters. It's like, and if everyone just walked around and there was no people who were like, actually, my purpose is to figure out a way to clean the ocean. My purpose is to research infectious diseases. My purpose is to, you know, work in hospice or something. Like, there's so many examples of like the power of having individualized purpose here and now in this world. And so to say that like the only fulfillment you can derive from life comes from a child, it's like, again, it's like this passing on. It's like that kind of karmic belief, karmic cycle of like, I am passing on the obligation to take care of the world to the next generation. I am passing on the, you know, the purpose of, you know, helping the earth and living in harmony with the earth and all of these things. I'm passing that on to the next generation. That is not my obligation, because my obligation, my purpose comes only from having a child. And I checked that box. And so I'm good, right? Like, and so I think that, you know, there's a lot of purpose to be found in this world, and that your children, this comes back again to that, you know, choosing children from a conscious place. When you do walk a conscious path, and let's say you do eventually consciously choose to bring a child into the world, your child benefits from you being healed. Your child benefits from you being ready. Your child benefits from you having purpose, from you having built, from you having established yourself in the world, right? And so, you know, motherhood is the most sacred path to walk, and it doesn't just begin when a child arrives. Much like walking the path of conscious partnership, you are in a constant dance of preparation. You are in a constant dance of awakening your awareness to the energetic frequency of conscious partnership. And it's the same thing with walking the conscious path to parenthood. You are always preparing, you are always living consciously the path of motherhood, even before that child eventually arrives. And even if that child doesn't arrive, you birth life through your existence in a multitude of other ways. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this, and I hope that you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I'll talk with you again soon.